Greetings, digital wanderers. This evening, we plunge into a cosmos both grand and unforgiving. The daily grind within the Roman Empire. Cast aside notions of senatorial grandeur or imperial crowns. No golden laurels or lavish marble baths await you here. Tonight, you are not even the renowned Julius Caesar. Instead, you embody a common soul, abruptly propelled into a realm of basic footwear, omnipresent filth, and state-sanctioned demises. Therefore, before settling in, please consider tapping the like button and subscribing, but only if you genuinely value the content I bring forth. Additionally, share in the comments where you're observing from and your local time. It's truly compelling to witness our global community. Now, dim your ambient illumination, perhaps activate a gentle fan for a soft, underlying current of air, and let us commence this nocturnal expedition together. You surface from slumber to a dissonant chorus of agitated poultry and a newborn's wails echoing through the confines. Congratulations, you've just materialized inside a Roman insula, the ancient precursor to what we now call an apartment block. Imagine a multi-tiered death trap, precariously assembled from particulate matter, fervent supplications, and construction standards that defy logic. Your dwelling likely occupies the third or fourth stratum, an unfortunate circumstance. Ascending the floors inversely correlates with social standing and directly amplifies the probability of your overhead structure caving in when someone inadvertently drenches it with olive oil from above. Your chamber is confining, scarcely larger than a meager storage space, with lithic barriers that weep moisture in summer and become glacial in winter. There is no proper aperture, merely a modest void that admits atmosphere, effluvium, and the occasional avian intruder. Your sleeping surface is a misshapen sack brimming with dried stalks and teeming with microscopic life. The covering emits the aroma of damp fleece and lingering lament. The space is devoid of furnishings, ornamentation, and assuredly, no culinary preparation zone. Culinary activity indoors is interdicted. Even a modest ember could engulf the entire edifice, and fire prevention protocols remain centuries from conception. Your meager holdings comprise a ceramic vessel, a worn textile garment, and perhaps a wooden instrument for untangling if you are feeling exceptionally lavish. Sanitary facilities are absent, neither within your chamber nor anywhere within your edifice. Your receptacle for bodily fluids reposes in the corner, a silent arbiter of your predicament. You will be compelled to navigate treacherous, protesting stairs to void its contents into the street's drainage channel, all while offering silent pleas that you do not lose footing and contribute your own biological tribute to the morning's urban detritus. And the partitioning, it is gossamer thin. You can discern your adjacent inhabitant's prayers, his expectorations, his marital disputes, and, regrettably, his marital non-disputes, if my meaning is clear. The atmosphere hangs heavy with combustion residue, fungal decay, and the undeniable effluvium of unbathed humanity. Someone on the lower level is already baking a leavened dough, but its aroma does not extend to you. Itinerant vendors are proclaiming prices for dried fruit and Piscine viscera. A remote military officer barks commands at an individual already likely in distress. You have not yet even breached the threshold, and you are already perspiring, pruritic, and quite possibly inhaling metallic particulate from the archaic conveyance system. Welcome to the Roman daily grind. You are not a sovereign. You are not a combatant in an arena. You are simply another fatigued spirit within an overpopulated dwelling, striving to avoid a descent down a collapsing stairwell or inadvertently affronting a municipal divinity before high noon. And you still possess 24 hours of this temporal unit before you. Having successfully negotiated the precarious descent from your insulous crooked stairs, it's time to address the second most urgent requirement of the early day, your internal reservoir. Naturally, your private chamber lacks a water closet. No basin, no flushing mechanism, not even a dignified container. Instead, you shuffle along the thoroughfare, chamber pot in one grip, your last vestiges of personal discretion in the other, orienting yourself towards the nearest latrina, Rome's rendition of a public sanitation facility. And labeling it public is an understatement. It functions more as a communal gathering spot for strangers who are perfectly at ease establishing visual contact while performing bodily functions. You arrive to discover an elongated lithic bench punctuated by carved apertures. Beneath this bench, a shallow conduit conveys a current of liquid, just sufficient to transport the accumulated effluvium of the city's less privileged strata. You take a seat, if you dare, and hope your immediate neighbor is not inclined towards discourse. Privacy, a non-entity. Entry barriers? Absolutely absent. Individuals treat it as an amplified public square. Merchants deliberate grain costs while squatting. A veteran soldier recounts narratives of his back pain. Meanwhile, you merely strive to avoid direct visual engagement with the individual opposite you, who is nonchalantly masticating pickled fruit. Then arrives the true zenith, the tersorium. This is a shared sponge affixed to a shaft, maintained within a receptacle of acidic liquid or saline solution. In theory, one rinses it before application. In practice, let us merely state that this sponge has borne witness to things, unutterable things. You cleanse with hesitation, hoping the acidic liquid has fulfilled its purpose. If you are feeling fortunate, perhaps you procured your own fabric. If you are feeling prosperous, possibly some organic growth. But more likely, you have utilized what every other individual has, and now carry the quiet burden of collective ablution. And if you contemplate circumventing this ritual by seeking refuge in a narrow passageway, reconsider. Public micturition statutes are in force, penalties are quite real, and Roman law enforcement is not renowned for subtle admonitions. Once concluded, you cleanse your digits. No, wait, you do not. There is no saponaceous agent, no flowing water, merely a swift rinse from a communal basin that has encountered more digits than a celebratory hand-clapping event. You depart the latrina feeling less burdened, and perhaps a touch more spiritually depleted. But such is Rome. And now, the morning repast, if it can even be afforded such a designation. So, you've attended to your early duties and somehow managed to avoid collapsing or being apprehended. Commendable. Now, it's time for the morning meal, purportedly the most vital sustenance of the day. Unless, of course, you are Roman, in which case it is more of a perfunctory custom preceding the commencement of genuine labor and tribulation. Welcome to the Ientaculum, a Roman dawn repast composed of precisely two components: aged leavened dough and attenuated fermented grape beverage. Occasionally, there is solidified milk product, sometimes pickled fruit, but predominantly There is simply profound disillusionment. Dispel thoughts of stimulating beverages. The Romans did not possess them. No ovum, no cured porcine flesh, no flattened cakes, and assuredly no plant-based milk concoctions. The morning meal is not intended to gratify. It is merely designed to prevent your expiration. Your leavened dough is likely panis rusticus, a coarse, unyielding mass of milled grain and abrasive particles, baked the previous day or perhaps even earlier. It possesses sufficient density to serve as a bludgeon and exhibits the texture of geological formations. The fermented grape beverage is heavily diluted because even the Romans comprehended that inebriation before sunrise was an abysmal notion, unless one happened to be a legislator. There is no culinary preparation area in your private chamber, so you consume this sustenance while upright in the thoroughfare or crouched adjacent to a water source, alongside other equally unenthusiastic citizens, gnawing on leavened dough that tastes of bland arboreal bark. If you possess a modicum of oil or a faint trace of garum, Rome's celebrated pungent fermented piscine essence, then congratulations, you have introduced an olfactory horror to your already bleak repast. If you were affluent, perhaps you would savor fructus or mel, but you are not. You are a typical Roman citizen, merely prosperous enough to elude servitude and just impoverished enough to covet your neighbor's fractured vessel of caprine lactescence. Infrequently, vendors pass by offering heated leguminous fritters or saccharine pastries, and for a fleeting instant, optimism flickers. But then you recall your coin receptacle is more void than a combatant's empathy. So you masticate your leavened dough and imagine it is confection. And this is the day's inauguration, with complex carbohydrates, mild dehydration, and a burgeoning comprehension that you are about to traverse 7 miles in Roman foot coverings with only stale fragments in your gastric system and a lingering mild intoxication from the previous night's residual fermented grape beverage. It does not ameliorate from this point because now it is time for toil. Following your substantial morning meal of hardened bread and subtle despair, it's time to confront the Roman work period. And let us be explicit, unless you are a legislator, a wordsmith with a patron, or one of the fortunate few who inherited land from a departed, heirless relative, you are engaged in labor and you are toiling diligently. You might be a manual laborer, a carrier, a ceramicist, a mason, a street purifier, or, if your destiny is truly unfortunate, a subterranean conduit worker. Rome necessitates myriad components: thoroughfares, aqueduct systems, consecrated structures, ablution facilities, and someone must construct them. That someone? You, with your bare extremities, beneath the relentless solar orb, clad in footwear that provides the same longitudinal arch support as a moistened botanical remnant. The Roman work period commences early, extraordinarily early. The solar disk has barely ascended, yet the supervisor is already vociferating in the ancient tongue and brandishing a blunt instrument. If you are tardy, you forfeit a day's emolument or, worse, are subjected to corporeal chastisement, public opprobrium, or dismissal, which in Roman terminology signifies honorable demise by starvation. Your implements are rudimentary. You excavate with a shovel fashioned from fragmented wood and desperate aspirations, transport construction blocks upon your back, and convey liquid from a subterranean reservoir that exudes the odor of aged textile and sheer ambition. There are no hand coverings, no cranial protection, merely perspiration, particulate matter, and the constant cognizance that a single misstep could simultaneously fracture your spinal column and your means of subsistence. And if you are an artisan, good fortune to you. You are competing with hundreds of others vending identical argillaceous containers, footwear, or inexpensive outer garments. Price depreciation is commonplace, and craftsmanship is irrelevant if a more affluent citizen decides he finds your visage displeasing. Even more esteemed occupations such as message carrier, fiscal record keeper, or instructor are scarcely glamorous. You are either sprinting through Rome's tumultuous thoroughfares with rolled manuscripts tucked beneath your arm, meticulously transcribing numerals for an individual who will promptly forget your appellation, or endeavoring to impart the ancient tongue to a group of legislative offspring who already perceive themselves as divinities. Female individuals, they too are engaged in labor, fiber manipulation, textile production, agricultural yield vending, or market stall administration. In addition to nurturing offspring, in addition to overseeing the domestic sphere, in addition to enduring parturition. Concurrent task execution before it was a recognized concept. And subsequent to all this, you might receive a brief period for midday sustenance, perhaps if your overseer is not in an ill disposition or attempting to impress a visiting regional administrator. So yes, you labor or you expire in the attempt. Rome may be perpetual, but your dorsal aspect assuredly will not be. Thus, you've navigated the early hours without fainting or receiving a lashing. Now it's time to traverse the ancient Roman thoroughfare, a tumultuous, congested gauntlet seemingly conceived by an entity harboring a profound aversion to personal zones and communal hygiene. Envision it. The solar orb is elevated, the metropolis vibrates with dynamism, and the thoroughfare is unequivocally animated. Not in a metaphorical sense, but literally. Rodents, winged insects, uncollared canines, domesticated animals, mendicants, vendors vociferating in half a dozen lexicons, unrestrained juveniles, pilfers feigning aid to elderly matriarchs while absconding with your coin receptacle. It parallels a major urban nexus, if that nexus lacked plumbing and everyone transported a domesticated ungulate. Let us discuss the foundational infrastructure. Roman conduits for passage were engineering marvels. Precisely rectilinear, expertly surfaced, and typically deluged with a concoction of bodily waste, spilled fermented beverage, ejected stomach contents, animal excretions, and the lingering remnants of the previous evening's garum. The central axis of the thoroughfare functions as an open waste channel. Step off the elevated pedestrian surface without vigilance, and congratulations, you have just sanctified your foot covering in the revered currents of human misery. Wheeled conveyances clatter past with no speed constraints, no designated crossing points, and zero restraint. They do not yield to perambulators. In fact, Roman legislation actually interdicted heavy cart circulation during the diurnal period within the urban expanse, which implied drivers would propel them through the nocturnal period in darkness without braking mechanisms, akin to equestrian competitors on a stringent temporal deadline. If you are not crushed by rotating discs, you will be jostled by brachial extensions, receptacles, or an incensed aquatic creature vendor vociferating about deteriorated, elongated Piscine specimens. Then there is the atmospheric content, dense with combustion byproduct from culinary fires, aromatic resin from consecrated structures, and the unmistakable effluvium of communal lavatories borne on the prevailing air currents. Oh, and deceased fauna. Occasionally, individuals simply abandon them there. If a canine collapses in the public assembly area, Someone might simply drape a textile over it and depart. And do not overlook the public spectacles. Impromptu altercations, spontaneous public remonstrations, or a political figure's procession that immobilizes circulation for hours while wind instrument players blast discordant fanfares directly into your auditory orifices. So yes, the Roman thoroughfare is a sentient entity, and it is intent on your demise. Slip on a dried fruit, be struck by an uncontrolled conveyance, or inadvertently offend a patrician's pet simian, and your temporal unit could conclude more swiftly than Caesar on the Ides of March. And all you desired was to procure some legumes. You are perspiring, soiled, and desperately yearning for a frigid libation. The auspicious news: you reside in Rome, a metropolis extolled for its aqueduct systems, those magnificent feats of engineering that convey unadulterated water from the elevated terrains directly into the core of the imperium. The inauspicious news: that water offers no particular consideration for your individual consumption. Unless you possess sufficient affluence to inhabit a domus featuring your own private spout, you are sharing the liquid with thousands of your closest expectorating, sternutating, unbathed compatriots. Your alternatives are the communal spouts, where every individual replenishes their vessels, cleanses their pedal extremities, and occasionally immerses a juvenile, either for amusement or rudimentary ablution. And by ablution, we signify a damp semblance of optimism. If you genuinely desire to cleanse yourself, your optimal recourse is the thermae, the Roman communal ablution facilities. They are ubiquitous, and every individual avails themselves of them. Sounds civilized, does it not? But here is the caveat. The liquid circulates through multiple reservoirs devoid of saponaceous agents, chemical purifiers, and very little sense of propriety. You will discover yourself seated in a tepid bath alongside a dozen other male individuals, none of whom prioritize modesty. Conversations are boisterous, politically charged, and occasionally conducted entirely in a state of unclothedness. One individual might attempt to vend you foot coverings while another cleanses his auditory orifices with a stick. And the liquid, it has been communally shared. If you were anticipating a sensation of genuine purity, reconsider. You are essentially macerating in microbial life with a faint aroma of aromatic foliage. Also, a light-hearted factoid: the hydraulic conveyance system frequently employs metallic conduits containing lead. Yes, lead. Romans were consumed by engineering, but less so by chemical properties. Over time, that convenient internal conveyance system could instigate a plethora of delightful ancillary effects such as reduced erythrocyte count, joint inflammation, reproductive incapacitation, and if you are truly favored by fortune, cognitive derangement. Desire a more secure libation? Fermented grape beverage. Seriously, aqueous solutions are regarded with skepticism, particularly in the less affluent districts, where contamination from sanitation facilities and thoroughfare runoff is rampant. Thus, fermented grape beverage is attenuated and consumed throughout the diurnal period by male and female individuals and juveniles alike, because what superior method exists to endure a decaying imperium than with a gentle, mild intoxication? So yes, Rome introduced water into the urban center before much of the globe comprehended the concept of a conduit. But for the average citizen, it is a risk assessment every time you imbibe, cleanse, or rinse your pedal digits. Savor your aqueduct systems. Just do not repose your confidence in their purity. Welcome to the Roman Imperium, where discomfort is not merely a potentiality. It is the perpetual auditory backdrop to your entire existence. You impact your digit, no frozen application, no pain alleviators. You clench your dentition and persevere until it either heals improperly or detaches. Fracture a skeletal component? You bind it in a soiled fabric and attempt to limit respiratory depth. Acquire a sharp foreign object beneath your epidermal layer? Good luck. That is the genesis of microbial proliferation and potentially the conclusion of your temporal duration. Roman societal structure does not emphasize physical ease. There are no ergonomically designed implements, no cushioned seating, no concept of gentle progression. If you are a manual laborer, you are elevating construction blocks with a protrusion of internal organs and a supplication. If you are a military operative, you traverse 32 kilometers daily with abraded pedal extremities and an arachnid sting upon your femoral region. If you are a female individual undergoing parturition, well, brace yourself for agonizing sensation. Your midwifery attendant might possess a vocal incantation. That is approximately the extent of medical intervention. Every anatomical component of your being is one misstep from becoming an open wound or a cautionary narrative. And unless you reside in proximity to a consecrated structure with a particularly devoted clerical figure, your optimal alternatives are homemade unguents, herbal combustion products, or simply disregarding the issue until it spontaneously resolves or you find yourself interred. The concept of insensitivity to pain is non-existent. Surgical procedures are conducted while you vociferate into a wooden block. Displaced shoulder joint? It is manually repositioned by an individual named Marcus, who acquired the technique by observing someone else's unsuccessful attempt. Dental procedures? Envision a metal worker, now envision your oral cavity. That is the tableau. And if you are indentured or impoverished, individuals do not even deign to feign solicitude. You could be experiencing significant sanguineous loss by the thoroughfare, and the maximum empathy you will elicit is, avoid staining the ornamental floor covering. Even upper-class Romans embraced discomfort as a testament to virtue. Stoicism was the predominant philosophical paradigm of the epoch. Enduring suffering without lamentation was considered admirable. If you wept over a fractured limb, you were not merely in distress. You were feeble. Authentic Romans endure silently, then subsequently compose verse about it. So yes, discomfort is perpetually present, and it usually arrives without forewarning, without remedy, and definitively without compassion. On that sanguine note, let us scrutinize what transpires when you actually consult a Roman medical practitioner. So, you've sustained an impairment. Perhaps it's the inflamed epidermal lesion from yesterday's toil, or possibly you attempted to excise facial hair with a bronze implement, and now your mental projection of your chin resembles a combatant's training ground. Regardless, it is time to seek medical intervention, which in ancient Rome is less about restoration and more about surviving the endeavor. Let us commence with the foundational principles. Roman therapeutic practice is a tumultuous amalgamation of Hellenic doctrines, mystical conjectures, and a surprisingly substantial quantity of botanical foliage. The core conviction: the corporeal form is governed by four vital fluids: blood, mucus, bilious yellow fluid, and bilious black fluid. Feeling unwell? One of them is disequilibrium. The remedy? Evacuate something. So your medical practitioner, who may or may not also be your hairstylist, immediately reaches for the blood-sucking invertebrates or a cutting instrument, because the drawing of blood is the default amelioration for everything from cranial discomfort to moral shortcomings. Possess a cough? Let us incise a vascular channel. Experiencing despondency? We will simply drain some sorrow from your upper limb. Surgical intervention? Oh yes, it exists. Roman surgical practitioners possessed cutting instruments, grasping instruments, and even bone-drilling instruments. What they lacked were agents to induce unconsciousness. You remain sentient throughout the entirety of the procedure, clutching the periphery of a wooden surface while an individual clad in a soiled, draped garment excavates your corporeal matter with the assurance of someone who once briefly perused a rolled manuscript concerning the topic. Antimicrobial agents? Not really a concept. They might cleanse lesions with fermented grape beverage or acidic liquid, which offers some benefit, but also causes sharp discomfort akin to divine retribution. Microbial proliferation is a common consequence, as is cessation of life. Prescriptions vary wildly. You might be administered mel, allium, pulverized coleopterans, or a poultice concocted from botanical matter, calcined residue, and highly specific categories of animal excrement. If your condition deteriorates, you are advised to slumber within a consecrated structure, supplicate to the deity of healing, and anticipate that divine nocturnal visions will manifest your cure. And if none of it proves efficacious, well, your medical practitioner expresses indifference, your kin ignite a luminary, and your neighbors commence murmuring about what particular ominous sign your demise might portend. It is not that Romans were apathetic to corporeal well-being. They simply had not quite deciphered what truly facilitated recovery and what more efficiently accelerated your demise. So next time you experience a sudden expulsion of air from your respiratory system, be thankful for contemporary antimicrobial compounds and for not existing in a world where restoration often commences with sanguineous depletion. After an extended day of perspiring, experiencing corporeal loss, and eluding wheeled conveyances, you are famished. Time for the evening repast, or as the Romans termed it, cena. Just do not anticipate anything remotely comforting. Let us commence with what will be absent from the dining surface. No flatbread adorned with toppings, no elongated strands of dough, no solanaceous fruit, no tubers, no cacao-derived product, no saccharine substance, and absolutely no stimulating beverage. None of those items had been discovered or imported as yet. This is not Italic culinary artistry. This is pre-Italian edible survival. You settle down to a wooden receptacle containing something brownish and vaguely warm. It is likely pulse, a cereal preparation concocted from a specific grain, leguminous plants, or lentil seeds. It tastes like moistened particulate matter with a subtle botanical note, if you are fortunate. If you are not fortunate, it simply tastes like moistened particulate matter devoid of the botanical note. Proteinaceous material is scarce unless you pursued, trapped, or harvested it yourself. Flesh is costly, and even when procured, it is often in a state of decay. Roman culinary techniques did not incorporate chilling mechanisms, so preservation involved extensive salting, smoking, or marinating it in garum, a fermented piscine essence that emits the odor of a deceased oceanic entity and assails your very essence just contemplating its ingestion. If you are feeling celebratory, there might be boiled vegetative matter, hardened lacteous product, or the occasional dried fruit. Affluent Romans dined on exotic culinary items like roasted avian creatures resembling flamingos, filled slumbering rodents, or gelatinous marine organisms in acidic liquid Epicurean delights that primarily declare, "Observe my prosperity and my complete disregard for gustatory pleasure." Your fermented grape beverage is attenuated perpetually. Consuming it undiluted is considered barbarous. But do not be troubled. The aqueous solution with which it is intermingled is likely dubious as well, so you are merely selecting the rapidity with which you desire to become indisposed. Post-meal sweet? Perhaps dried fructus, perhaps nuts. Or perhaps you are abstaining from sustenance because it is a celebratory day honoring a deity who frowns upon excessive consumption. Regardless, you will not be concluding your nocturnal period with a lead dessert. There are no textile implements for cleansing. You wipe your extremities on a fabric shared with 10 other individuals, or simply utilize your garment and pretend it is unblemished. By the conclusion of the repast, your internal organ for digestion is replete but uneasy, and your exhalation carries the aroma of allium, fermented grape beverage, and a hint of despondency. But at least you are nourished. Now all you must do is endure the Roman nocturnal period. And trust me, that is no leisurely perambulation. After an extensive day of perspiring, accumulating grime, and eluding wheeled conveyances, you might be anticipating a modicum of diversion, something to deflect your thoughts from your deteriorating dwelling and the open waste channel beyond. Well, auspicious news, you are situated in Rome, a metropolis where amusement abounds. Inauspicious news, much of it is utterly horrifying. Let us commence with the paramount attraction, the Flavian Amphitheatre, the crowning achievement of Roman engineering and the locus where your ethereal essence quietly dissipates. This is the venue where multitudes convene to witness male individuals fatally wound each other for recreational purposes, while fauna consume incarcerated individuals, and occasionally, if the supreme ruler desires a dramatic spectacle, they reenact full naval engagements with actual liquid and genuine submersion. Admission is without charge, which sounds magnanimous until you comprehend it is gratuitous because the state desires you thoroughly preoccupied while the legislative body increases fiscal obligations and surreptitiously annexes a distant territory. You are seated compressed between perspiring strangers, vociferating as a combatant loses a distal extremity. There is sanguineous material, arenaceous particles, and occasional public capital punishments executed with additional embellishment. You are applauding, though you are uncertain as to the motivation. Feeling somewhat delicate? Prefer dramatic presentation? Proceed to the tiered performance space for a Roman theatrical production. Perhaps a tragedy composed in the ancient tongue you barely comprehend, or a comedic piece where the punchline involves an individual comically feigning disrespect towards a principal deity with a cured animal product. Subtlety is not a Roman strong suit. If you are feeling athletically inclined, attempt the Great Circus. Wheeled vehicle competitions are swift, exhilarating, and frequently fatal. There are no protective barriers, no head coverings, and an abundance of vociferation. Collisions are inescapable and spectacular, and the assembled multitude absolutely adores it. They are present for the aggression and the wagering. Do not vociferate for the opposing faction unless you are prepared to engage in physical confrontation on your return journey. And then there is the street-level entertainment. Individuals expelling fire, acrobatic performers, melodic practitioners, confidence artists, and the occasional philosophical monologue from an unshod individual with nothing left to forfeit. If the current spectacle does not appeal, wait 5 minutes. Something else, or someone else, will commence vociferating. But beneath it all, there is a peculiar, captivating derangement. Rome did not merely divert its populace. It mesmerized them into forgetting the brutal actuality of diurnal existence. It militarized spectacle. And if that is insufficient to induce numbness, there is perpetually more fermented grape beverage. Now let us embark upon a perambulation through punitive systems, Roman methodology. Disclaimer: it is not consoling. You have survived labor, sustenance, and a combatant being impaled for public adulation. You might believe you are now secure, that as long as you maintain a discreet profile, the legal framework will afford you protection. Ah, that is rather charming. In Rome, the legal framework does not safeguard, it reminds. It reminds you that you are inconsequential, disposable, and that clemency is a prerogative reserved for effigies of supreme rulers. First and foremost, legal standing is paramount. If you are a citizen, you possess entitlements, in theory. You cannot be publicly subjected to corporeal chastisement unless an influential individual becomes exceedingly exasperated, and you are entitled to a formal judicial proceeding. If you are not a citizen, justice manifests as a clenched hand, a heated implement for marking, or a swift execution beyond the municipal boundaries. Indentured individuals? They are chattel. If an indentured individual perpetrates the murder of their proprietor, even if the proprietor merited such a fate, every indentured individual within the domicile might be executed simply to convey a clear message. That message: do not even contemplate such an act. If you are accused of a transgression, do not anticipate a calm discourse with a legal representative. Judicial proceedings are public theatrics. The more affluent party presents evidentiary witnesses, offers illicit payments, and employs dramatic gesticulations. You bring your textile garment and a burgeoning sense of foreboding. If you can spontaneously shed tears, that might prove advantageous. If you possess no benefactors, supplicate to the principal deity and hope the magistrate is not suffering from the after-effects of excessive libation. Punishments are devised not merely to inflict suffering, but to discourage. Pilferers can be branded or have their manual digits fractured. Fabricators of untruths might have their lingual organs pierced. Deception? Public flagellation or banishment if you are fortunate. And if you affront the supreme ruler, it is not incarceration. It is cessation of life, typically quite imaginatively. Certain transgressions necessitate public chastisement, ideally before a multitude that vociferates louder than they did for the morning's decapitation. Fixation upon a cross is prevalent, a protracted, gradual, humiliating ordeal. It was not exclusively for a specific historical figure. It was the customary method for rebels, pilferers, and any individual the state wished to make an illustrative example of. And recall, law enforcement is not present to aid you. The vigils are Rome's equivalent of fire suppression personnel and civic constabulary, underpaid, overtasked, and frequently susceptible to corruption. If you are subjected to robbery, they might express indifference. If you offer them illicit payments, they might even assist you in robbing another individual. So yes, Rome possesses statutes, inscribed in stone, recited in public assembly areas, but they serve power, not equity. Now let us engage in discourse concerning divine entities, because you are not solely adhering to human directives here. You are within the domain of the principal deity. After enduring the perilous thoroughfares and circumventing Roman legal structures, you might harbor expectations of finding solace in spiritual belief. A modicum of tranquility, a touch of individual spiritual practice. No, not here. In the Roman Imperium, spiritual belief is not a private matter. It is an institution, an omnipresent cloud of aromatic smoke and obligation enveloping every conscious moment of your temporal existence. You do not select your divine entities, they select you. And there are so many of them. There is a divine entity for every conceivable aspect. Articulated fasteners for apertures, a specific goddess. Subterranean conduits, a particular goddess. Demarcations, a specific deity. And even fungal growth, a particular deity. You cannot traverse 5 paces without encountering a consecrated structure. If you do not pause to bow, ignite a luminary, or utter a supplication, you are not merely being discourteous, you are inviting calamity. Perhaps not today, but eventually. And when your overhead structure collapses, every individual will acknowledge it knowingly and remark, "Ah yes, he neglected the offering during the midwinter festival." Religious observances punctuate the temporal calendar, dozens each year. On those days, commercial activity ceases, fauna are ritually slaughtered, and the atmosphere is saturated with the aroma of roasted bovine and moist marble. You attend out of devoutness, but also out of apprehension, because if the divine entities are not properly venerated, they will retaliate with widespread afflictions, prolonged arid periods, or a truly catastrophic harvest that ruins everyone's supply of leguminous plants. Now let us discuss the veneration of the supreme ruler. The state expects you to revere the supreme ruler, not merely as a sovereign, but as a living divine entity. You are expected to offer aromatic smoke at his ceremonial table, chant his praises, and never, ever avert your gaze with a dismissive gesture during a celebratory procession. That borders on high treason. If you are observed not participating in public veneration, say you are a little too subdued during a specific annual festival, or you fail to project grain into the consecrated flame, you could be labeled impious, devoid of religious belief, or worst of all, dubious. Dubiousness in Rome is akin to sanguineous fluid in waters infested with predatory aquatic creatures. And if you are affiliated with a foreign spiritual practice, you had better maintain strict confidentiality unless it is officially sanctioned. The state is not partial to unfamiliar divine entities unless they contribute fermented grape beverage, fiscal obligations, or new military personnel. Roman spiritual practice is not about conviction. It is about prescribed actions. You do not have to feel it. You just have to execute it correctly, punctually, and in public. And you had best exhibit a positive facial expression while you sacrifice that ruminant. Speaking of societal performance, let us ascend the perilous hierarchy of Roman aspirations in the subsequent segment. You have offered obeisance to the divine entities, eluded a legal entanglement, and survived a communal ablution without contracting something truly outlandish. But now comes the most enervating aspect of Roman existence, the societal stratification. A brutal, intricately calibrated mechanism where every utterance, every gesture, and even the positioning of your foot-covering strap could either elevate or dismantle you. Roman society is an ascending structure, but it is coated in an unctuous substance and lined with sharp implements. At the pinnacle reside the legislative body members, inherited wealth, draped garments adorned with purple bands, and landholdings so expansive they possess their own geographical identifier. Below them, the equestrian order, the affluent commercial stratum. Then come the common citizens, like yourself, the struggling middle and lower economic classes. Below that, emancipated individuals, indentured individuals, foreign nationals, and the unfortunate person who once inadvertently insulted a sculpted representation of a revered emperor. Desire advancement? You will necessitate patrons, influential individuals who offer safeguarding in exchange for unwavering allegiance, errands, reciprocal favors, and the occasional vote. It is akin to possessing a supervisor, a benevolent benefactor, and a property owner all encapsulated within one charmingly supercilious package. Each morning you visit your patron's domicile as part of the ritualized morning greeting. You await your turn in queue with other clients, commend his coiffure, perhaps laud his offspring's attire, then humbly solicit a favor, typically monetary assistance, sustenance, or a recommendation. If you are fortunate, he tosses you a coin and permits you to transport his mobile conveyance through the public forum. Congratulations, you are now interlinked. Every action you undertake is observed and meticulously examined. Your attire must be unblemished, not fashion-forward, merely unblemished. Your verbal expression must be proper, your acquaintances judiciously chosen. And whatever you do, do not exhibit overt ambition. That instills unease in individuals. If you ascend too rapidly, others will conspire to effect your downfall, socially or literally. Establishing connections is a form of conflict. Whispered reports are currency. A solitary, ill-considered remark at a formal gathering can terminate your career trajectory. The appropriate marital union can safeguard your entire lineage. But you must execute your strategy cautiously. Affection is for bards. The remainder of Rome marries for alliances and access to patrimonies. And even if you attain an elevated position, do not become overly comfortable. One insufficient harvest, one omitted ritual, one envious competitor, and it is all concluded. You will not even perceive the sharp implement approaching. Now the solar orb is descending. Surely things become quiescent during the nocturnal period. Correct? Not in Rome. The solar orb descends below the skyline of Rome, and for a fleeting moment, you contemplate, perhaps now, finally, I can attain repose. But nightfall within the Roman Imperium is not a period for tranquility. It signifies a transformation in ambience from noisy and chaotic to dim and overtly lethal. First, let us discuss illumination. It is absent. Unless you possess sufficient affluence to combust oleaginous lamps throughout the nocturnal period, and few do. Most individuals rely on lunar luminescence, spatial recall, and blind optimism to navigate the city's intricate narrow passages. If you stumble and fall, no one will offer assistance. They might simply acquire your footwear. The vigils, Rome's official nocturnal guardians, are purportedly meant to patrol the thoroughfares, prevent conflagrations, and deter illicit activities. In actuality, they are overburdened, inadequately compensated, and frequently more inclined towards somnolence than acts of bravery. Some are courageous, most are susceptible to illicit payments, and all of them are numerically inferior. Criminal elements are well aware of this. Pilferers, assailants, and the occasional unoccupied former arena combatant prowl the obscurities seeking effortless prey. If you are perambulating homeward unaccompanied, you are the effortless prey. It is irrelevant who you are. Unless you are armed, swift, or imperceptible, you are at risk. And then there is conflagration, Rome's paramount nocturnal terror. Insulely, those charming death-trap dwellings you inhabit are constructed from lignified material and fleeting aspirations. Culinary activity after twilight is prohibited for this very rationale, but statutes hold little authority over a hungry occupant. A solitary overturned lamp can reduce an entire urban block to incinerated remains within a span of hours. The grand incineration of 64 CE did not ignite itself, but once it commenced, it raged with the ferocity of a deity of conflict in a malevolent disposition. You might believe your edifice is secure until you detect the olfactory sensation of combustion byproduct at midnight and realize there exists no systematized evacuation protocol. You seize your singular textile garment, your bodily fluid receptacle, and perhaps your sense of self-worth, and sprint for your survival down a collapsing stairwell. And if it is not conflagration or pilferers, it is auditory disturbance. Inebriated revelry echoes through the thoroughfares. Processions for obscure divine entities perambulate by with percussive instruments and vociferations. And if a legislator's clandestine companion is displeased, every individual within a 3-block radius is cognizant of it. Somnolence in ancient Rome is a luxury. Silence is a fabrication. And safety, that is reserved for the prosperous, the armed, and the exceptionally fortunate. But alas, dawn is imminent. You merely have to endure one more nocturnal period and then recommence the cycle. The solar orb descends upon Rome, and with its descent, you might anticipate a moment of tranquility, a gentle atmospheric current, a quiet repast, perhaps even unconsciousness. Recalibrate your expectations. Rome does not become quiescent during the nocturnal hours. It merely transmutes into something darker, more resonant, and more perilous. The metropolis never truly achieves a state of repose. It actively stalks. Let us commence with conflagration. Roman edifices, particularly the towering lignified insulae where the less fortunate reside, are highly combustible structures awaiting a careless oleaginous lamp or cooking fire to reduce them to ash. There is no formalized fire suppression department, merely the vigils, who are partially fire responders, partially nocturnal observers, and partially profoundly inadequately compensated custodial staff. They carry receptacles and hopes. If your dwelling ignites, you might be extricated, or you might become a cautionary narrative in the subsequent day's whispered reports. Then there are the pilferers, the purse snatchers, and pocket emptiers who interpret the lunar luminescence as a hunting license. Rome's narrow passages are constricted and unilluminated. Torches are cost prohibitive. If you must perambulate after twilight, you are doing so by tactile sensation, by innate intuition, and hopefully not in solitude. Do not carry anything lustrous, do not establish visual contact, and whatever you do, do not become trapped between two inebriated combatants arguing about a missing foot covering. Speaking of inebriation, the city's nocturnal revelry flourishes. Public houses overflow with inexpensive fermented grape beverage, boisterous melodic expression, and male individuals vociferating abysmal verse about a deity of conflict and female individuals they will never impress. altercations erupt, games of chance conclude in bloodshed, and occasionally an incensed noble determines to resolve a grievance by instructing an indentured individual to physically chastise another individual in the thoroughfare. You discreetly conceal yourself within the obscurities and feign non-observance. If you're a woman navigating Rome solo, anticipate challenges. The city isn't welcoming to unescorted females after sunset. The avenues are claimed by the desperate, the reckless, and the dangerously idle. Rest isn't much better. Your dwelling groans as if on the verge of collapse. Rodents dart within the walls. Your neighbor's cough sounds like a dying goat. Nearby, screams erupt from passion, murder, or both. You press your face into a damp pillow, silently appealing to Mercury for stillness. Yet, Rome offers no quiet for you. In the Roman Empire, even the shadows are loud. And with dawn, the cycle repeats. You awoke in a deteriorating apartment, endured public latrines, chariot congestion, gladiator spectacles, lead exposure, leeches, religious festivals, burning roofs, and undercooked lentils steeped in fermented fish sauce. You honored deities you didn't comprehend, followed laws that offered no protection, and slept through uprisings, rodent infestations, and occasional public beheadings. You're grimy, exhausted, possibly ailing, and emotionally scarred by the shared sponge. And this is just one day. Could you last another? Honestly, no. Most contemporary humans, accustomed to air conditioning, antibiotics, and rapid delivery services, would falter by noon. You'd surrender before a second serving of garum. Yet, Romans persevered for centuries, because amidst all the squalor, brutality, and clamor, Rome functioned. Somehow, they constructed metropolises, thoroughfares, aqueducts, libraries, sanctuaries, and amphitheaters. Their dominion spanned continents. They enforced statutes, advanced philosophy, charted constellations, performed surgeries, and conceived concrete. Concrete, that material still outperforms most contemporary structures. They devised frameworks that influenced Europe and beyond for 2 millennia. Latin became the foundation of half the languages spoken today. Their architectural style inspired cathedrals, parliaments, and university campuses. Their governmental concepts, republics, senates, veto power, still resonate in modern democracies. But it came at a price. For the ordinary Roman, not the emperor or the marble-clad elite, daily existence was a relentless struggle. Still, they persevered. They adapted. They had no alternative, for Rome wasn't forged from gold. It was crafted from toil, apprehension, aspiration, and endurance, layer by layer, individual by individual, bloody century after bloody century. And that's why it persisted. As for you, you'd be pleading for modern plumbing and antihistamines by late afternoon. You'd trade your entire denarii pouch for a warm rinse and a chair with a backrest. And that's perfectly fine. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to grasp it. And perhaps, just perhaps, appreciate that someone, somewhere, once traversed those same grimy streets and contributed to building an empire. So you could be here today, clean, secure, and mildly appalled. Imagine yourself as a Parthian princess in the 2nd century BCE. Royal lineage flows in your veins, a name destined for greatness, Rhodogun. More importantly, you inhabit a world where your kin spend more time quelling uprisings than hosting social gatherings. Rhodogun's birth wasn't into serenity and adornments. She was born into resilience, equestrian life, and the perpetual threat of poisoned provisions. Her father, Mithridates II, was no inactive monarch. He was the one who transformed Parthia from an obscure border realm into a formidable empire that would one day contend with Rome. Yet, expansion begets challenges, namely insurrections, betrayals, and those neighbors unwilling to accept your army's new territorial claims. As a young woman, Rhodogun would have observed emissaries debating, commanders outlining strategies in the dirt, and palace scribes attempting to track shifting allegiances. Her training encompassed more than fine silks and formal rites. She mastered statecraft, commanding presence, and how to wear armor that complemented her adornments. The role of Parthian women here is crucial to understand. While not always in the public eye, Parthian noblewomen were no strangers to authority. Some governed cities, others orchestrated dynastic unions, and a select few, like Rhodogun, achieved renown not through their marriages, but through their conquests. And conquer she did, but that tale unfolds later. At this juncture in her life, Rhodogun's name was already recognized. She symbolized not merely royal heritage, but Parthian pride itself. She carried the expectation of either marrying a king or embodying monarchical spirit. She seemed disinclined to remain on the sidelines while cities burned or provinces revolted. While most royal ladies were being anointed and perfumed, Rhodogun was likely reviewing military dispatches and court logistics. She had no time for vanity, and as destiny would have it, she would one day make a pledge involving not cleansing her hair until an insurrection was quelled. Spoiler, it took a while. But before we delve into that unadorned crown moment, we need to comprehend the nature of a rebellion audacious enough to challenge a princess who preferred leading troops to wearing gold. The Parthian Empire, grand as it appeared on maps, was more a patchwork than a solid edifice. Spanning from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Mesopotamia and beyond, it was held together by matrimonial ties, solemn promises, and the occasional blade held firmly to a throat. So, when an uprising ignited in the western provinces, likely Media or Babylonia, it wasn't entirely unexpected. What was surprising was the rebels' audacity. These weren't mere disgruntled tax evaders. These were prominent aristocrats and urban leaders, incensed by the central authority and perhaps emboldened by the youth or absence of a male royal enforcer. They didn't just express discontent. They seized strongholds, silenced Parthian envoys, and essentially defied the crown. Under typical circumstances, the king would have dispatched a general or an ambitious, less intelligent cousin. But these were not typical circumstances. For reasons still debated by historians, perhaps timing, logistics, or pure royal defiance, Rhodogun herself assumed command, and not merely in an abstract, "I'll approve the battle plan's" manner. No, she mounted a horse, donned armor, and made a public declaration that would become legendary. She vowed not to wash, comb, or otherwise attend to her hair until the rebellion was crushed. It was audacious, dramatic, and frankly, a nightmare for palace stylists. But that vow, as dramatic as it sounds, wasn't about vanity. It was a statement, a visual emblem that linked her personal dignity to the empire's destiny. Every time someone beheld her tangled, dust-covered hair, they would be reminded, this isn't over until we triumph. And it worked. Soldiers rallied. The troops saw not just a princess. They saw a commander who was literally allowing her beauty to diminish with the war. She personified Parthian resilience, a kind that didn't rely on thrones, but on hardship, dust, and sweat. Meanwhile, the rebels likely didn't know whether to scoff or panic. They had anticipated a general, perhaps a diplomat. Instead, they faced a furious, unkempt woman galloping directly towards their gates with steely resolve and no time for pleasantries. Worse, she was serious. When Rhodogun departed the capital, she wasn't accompanied by a lavish court procession or showered in rose petals. She was escorted by cavalry, determination, and the weight of an empire that needed its rebels crushed like an overripe figure. And she looked the part. Any vestiges of courtly refinement were gone. Her hair, famously disheveled, began to take on a life of its own, hanging like a banner of war-torn resolve. In a world preoccupied with appearances, she transformed her own into a weapon. The campaign was not swift. This wasn't a single siege easily resolved with a bribe and a battering ram. The rebel cities were fortified and confident. They had expected hesitation from the central power, not a battle-hardened woman galloping through the dust with fire in her gaze. But Rhodogun didn't waver. Her military acumen was sharp, perhaps sharper than many of the men who had led before her. She employed classic Parthian tactics, mobility, feigned retreats, and swift raids. Her forces would appear at a rebel-held city's edge, vanish like smoke, and reappear a day later from an unexpected direction. Reports suggest her soldiers admired her not just as a symbol, but as a strategist. She didn't ride behind the lines. She was at the forefront, grime beneath her fingernails and fury beneath her helmet. And as the weeks passed, so did her hair. It's said that by the third month, the strands had begun to intertwine into cords, laden with dust, sweat, and the murmurs of battlefield prayers. But that only intensified her terror for her adversaries and her reverence among her men. Rebels dubbed her the Witch Queen, not for practicing magic, but because no noblewoman should still be fighting in the field and abstaining from bathing. Surely, they reasoned, something unnatural was at play. But there was nothing magical about it, just sheer, relentless discipline. By the time her army laid siege to the final rebel stronghold, her legend had grown faster than the rebellion itself. In taverns and tents alike, soldiers quipped that the enemy feared not Parthian swords, but Rhodogun's perpetual unkemptness. And truthfully, they weren't entirely wrong. The rebellion's last bastion loomed ahead, a walled city rumored to be impregnable, where the rebel leaders had entrenched themselves stubbornly. Supplies had been stockpiled, archers manned the battlements, and the gates had been reinforced with the kind of arrogant confidence only traitors possess. They believed they could outlast Rhodogun. A grave error. By now, her appearance was legendary. Word had spread not only throughout the empire, but into enemy territory. The woman who won't wash, they whispered, has arrived. Some claimed her hair had transformed into iron. Others asserted she hadn't slept in weeks. The myths accumulated like siege ladders, but Rhodogun was no myth. She was real, and she had strategies. Instead of launching a reckless assault, she opted for a slow, punishing siege, severing trade routes, intercepting messengers, contaminating wells. The rebels had prepared for a battle of swords. Instead, they faced starvation. She weaponized time itself, allowing her enemies to rot from within. And all the while, she camped outside the city with her soldiers, just another commander beneath the canvas tents. She shared their meals, gritty bread and lukewarm wine. She inspected their armor. She She led patrols, and she still, despite every opportunity, refused to even touch a comb. For her soldiers, the vow had become sacred. No one dared suggest she break it, even in jest. It had become a living embodiment of Parthian pride, a symbol that their suffering wasn't in vain. Every tangled strand was a reminder, we are still in this fight. Inside the rebel city, morale crumbled. They had expected to demoralize the enemy by holding out. Instead, it was they who began to wither. Their own commanders began to quarrel. Food ran low. Rumors of desertion began to ripple like cracks through stone. And then came the breaking point. A small gate, left unguarded for just an hour, perhaps due to fatigue, perhaps sabotage, was discovered by one of Rhodogun's scouts. That night, under the cloak of darkness and wind, her forces slipped in and opened the main gates from within. By morning, the city was hers, and Rhodogun, face streaked with sweat and ash, stood atop the battlements, unbathed, victorious, and utterly formidable. Victory was not declared with trumpets or parades. It was declared with water. After months of dust, battle, and relentless pursuit, Rhodogun stood before her army, not in royal robes, but in the same battlefield attire she had worn since the campaign began. Her armor bore indentations from rebel blades. Her face was etched with lines from sun and strain, and her hair, her wild, matted, filthy hair, now cascaded down her back like a lion's mane crafted from wire and legend. But she had done it. Every rebel city had fallen. Every oathbreaker had been brought low. And now, with her vow fulfilled, she could finally do what no one in the Empire had dared attempt or rush. She could wash her hair. According to tradition and later accounts passed down through oral history, Rhodogun summoned her servants not to an opulent chamber, but to a public courtyard. She desired her soldiers, those who had bled alongside her, to witness this moment. Basins were filled, oils were warmed, combs were retrieved from storage like sacred artifacts. And then, beneath the open sky, the warrior princess of Parthia, caked in the grime of war, began to scrub away months of rebellion. It was symbolic. Every tangle undone represented another city reclaimed. Every rinse of water over her scalp washed away defiance, soaking into the earth, as if the land itself had been restored. Some say she wept, others say she laughed. But what no one disputed was the silence among the troops as they watched. Hardened men, scarred and sunburned, stood like statues as Rhodogun emerged from her ritual, transformed. No crown was placed on her head. She didn't need one. The dust had become her diadem. The act of not washing had become more potent than any jewel. And in that moment, Parthia didn't just have a princess. It had a symbol. She could have returned to court in triumph, allowed scribes to compose flattering odes, permitted nobles to fawn over her in praise. But she didn't rush back to luxury. She remained with her troops a while longer. She dined with them. She listened to them. She knew that her legend had just begun, but she didn't want it forged in gold. She desired it forged in memory. After the hair washing that became an unforgettable event, Rhodogun could have ridden directly to the capital with fanfare, banners, and enough propaganda to last a century. But she didn't. Instead, she took the scenic route back, deliberately visiting the cities she had reclaimed one by one, walking their streets, inspecting their defenses, and ensuring no embers of rebellion still glowed beneath the ashes. This wasn't mere ceremony, it was strategy. Rhodogun understood the peril of victory, how quickly it can dissolve into complacency. Empires don't fall solely from defeat. They fall from forgetting their initial purpose. She wanted both rebels and loyalists to comprehend that Parthian strength wasn't just cavalry and currency. It was embodied in her very presence, a woman who chose hardship over comfort and earned loyalty by example, not dictate. And loyalty she received. Everywhere she went, people gathered not to gawk at royalty, but to gaze in or at her. Not polished, not perfumed, but genuine. She didn't inspire fear, she brought accountability. She requested reports, heard grievances, paid for supplies from her own war funds. She rewarded cities that had remained loyal and offered clemency, carefully, cautiously, to those who repented. By the time she reached the royal court, her return had already become a legend. Scribes hastened to record her tale. Artists debated how to portray her, wild-haired and battle-worn, or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered about the implications. A woman commanding armies, upholding vows, and now standing at the core of Parthian power with the allegiance of half the provinces in her hand. And here was the conundrum. What do you do with a princess who is more popular than most kings? Some urged she be married off, as if that would contain her influence. Others wanted her permanently in charge of border defenses. But Rhodogun seemed unconcerned with titles or politics. She had proven what she needed to. The battlefield had been her throne, the dust her crown, and her name, already etched in the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike, needed no royal inscription to endure. She didn't need a coronation. She had already been crowned, not with gold, but with history. In the months following her campaign, Rhodogun didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. She became a subject of poetry, sculpture, gossip, and admiration, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Every soldier who had fought under her command returned with a story, and every story made her grander, more enduring, more untouchable. Yet, in the palace halls of Parthia, where politics slithered like serpents behind silk curtains, her silence was disquieting. She didn't boast, she didn't lobby, she didn't ask for titles or lands. Instead, she observed, listened, and understood. The true battlefield had merely shifted from stone walls to whispered conversations. Even the king, her father, or possibly her brother, depending on the exact moment in the intricate Parthian dynastic timeline, had to tread carefully. Rhodogun wasn't just popular. She was respected in a way few men at court could rival, not admired for beauty or lineage, but for leadership, for command. She had transformed her vow into policy, her grimy state into folklore. And yet, the silence she maintained was as deliberate as any military maneuver. She didn't disclose her next plans, because perhaps even she didn't know. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting. She wasn't commanding troops or outwitting rebels. She was still, and that stillness unnerved many. What does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? One theory among historians is that Rhodogun leveraged this silence. Her mere presence, her every quiet nod or glance, compelled decisions. Officials hesitated to propose detrimental policies for fear she would disapprove. Generals postponed campaigns hoping she might offer her opinion. Her silence wasn't passive. It was a tool. She had discovered that not speaking could be more potent than speaking. And so she remained a living legend, traversing the palace corridors, her freshly washed hair braided not just with gold thread, but with memory. Her very existence challenged societal norms. She had demonstrated that Parthian might wasn't confined to masculine hands. It could ride into battle with tangled hair and return with cities at its feet. And all she had to do now was wait, because sometimes the greatest move is no move at all. As the years passed, Rhodogun's name gradually faded from official records. Parthian scribes, more inclined to exalt kings and dynasties than unruly warrior princesses, began to minimize her campaign. The silence she once used as a weapon now became the justification for her erasure. No grand monument was erected in her honor. No epic poem commissioned by the state bore her likeness on golden scrolls. But that's the essence of true legend. It doesn't require permission to endure. In the outposts where her army had marched, in the villages she spared, her name remained a whispered incantation. Mothers recounted stories of her to their daughters, not as a fairy tale, but as a caution to any man who underestimated a woman with a purpose. Soldiers recited her tactics as if they were sacred texts. And rebels, well, even decades later, they still spoke of her as if she might reappear from the dust with hair streaming like war banners. There's something profoundly unsettling about someone who defies every rule of their era and still triumphs. Rhodogun was not content to be a mere adornment in a court. She didn't play the flute, depict birds, or engage in the refined art of being quietly overlooked. She blazed through her time like a comet and then vanished just as swiftly. Historians have debated her fate. Some believe she withdrew from public life, choosing tranquility over politics. Others think she remained a behind-the-scenes advisor, shaping Parthian strategy from anonymity. A few romantics claim she rode out one final time to resolve a border dispute and disappeared into legend. Never confirmed, never denied. But what's certain is this: her legacy endured where it mattered most, among the people. She may not have worn the crown, but she ruled in ways no diadem ever could. She redefined the meaning of loyalty. She demonstrated that a vow, even one as peculiar as refusing to comb your hair, could be as binding as a royal decree and far more inspiring. And though history books may only grant her a footnote, the dust of Parthia still remembers her, because you don't need a marble statue to be eternal. You just need to keep your vow and win. In a remarkable turn, a queen confronted the most formidable sovereign of her age, not merely surviving but emerging triumphant. Yet, as swiftly as her victory materialized, she vanished from historical annals. No records persist of her subsequent years, her demise, or any further accomplishments. It is as if, her retribution complete, Tomarus simply rode back into the boundless expanse, allowing the currents of legend to carry her forward. For epochs, chroniclers, bards, and historians would strive to complete her narrative, transforming her into a potent emblem rather than a mere historical personage. To the Persians, her name became a bitter echo. The Hellenes perceived her as an enigma, a barbarian monarch who exhibited greater nobility than many kings. Among the peoples of Central Asia, Tomarus transmuted into folklore, a phantom queen who, fierce and unyielding, traverses the steppe with a blade that recalls ancient battles. Her lasting legacy would inspire innumerable artistic renditions across diverse cultures. Medieval manuscripts depicted her clad in imperial armor. Renaissance canvases imagined her poised grandly over Cyrus's lifeless form. In each epoch, she embodied what the people required: a nurturing matriarch, a vengeful spirit, a wild ruler, a cautionary tale of overweening pride, or an emblem of feminine power. Nevertheless, one truth transcends the myths. She redirected the flow of history. Tomyris did not inherit her station. She carved it through intense conflict and unwavering resolve. For a fleeting, indelible interval, the Queen of the Steppe demonstrated that not all empires ascend. Some are fated to crumble before the onslaught of warriors propelled by a yearning for retribution. Much of our comprehension of Tomyris does not stem from the indigenous Massartai, who left no stone tablets or royal archives, but from the chronicles of Herodotus, the Hellenic historian frequently hailed as the father of history. Penning his work a century after her time, Herodotus immortalized Tomyris in his histories, portraying her as a warrior queen of astonishing resolve and terrifying vindictiveness. Yet, Herodotus was not merely documenting occurrences. He was weaving a narrative, a fusion of historical account and moral instruction. For him and his Greek audience, Tomyris symbolized the ultimate reversal of imperial arrogance. Cyrus the Great, a figure who had subjugated a substantial portion of the known world, was vanquished not by a vast host or a rival monarch, but by a woman who fought not for renown, but for her offspring. Her triumph seemed almost mythic, and Herodotus treated it as such. He even recounted her gruesome act of reprisal. The wineskin overflowing with blood, Cyrus's severed cranium, and her damning declaration, "Sate your thirst." But to what extent was this veracious? Contemporary historians endlessly debate this. Some posit that Herodotus embellished or even fabricated components of the tale, employing Tomyris as a literary device to humble the Persian Imperium, which remained a formidable power over the Greek world during his era. Others believe that while the wineskin episode might be emblematic, the central event, Cyrus's demise at Tomyris's hands, likely transpired. There is also the matter of partiality. Herodotus, despite his insights, often interpreted foreign cultures through a Hellenic lens. He depicted the Massartai as untamed and free, yet noble, an exotic mirror of Greek ideals of honor and autonomy. Within that framework, Tomyris was not merely a barbarian. She functioned as a moral counterpoint to Persian ambition. Nonetheless, even if particulars blurred with the passage of time, Herodotus achieved one crucial objective. He ensured that Tomyris would not be consigned to oblivion. Thanks to him, she transcended being a historical footnote. She entered the realm of legend, where facts may soften but impact sharpens. And in that interstice between myth and memory, Tomyris's saga found a singular form of perpetuity. In a world dominated by monarchs and conquerors, Herodotus bequeathed to us a queen who steadfastly refused to yield and left her adversaries bleeding in the dust. Although she may have vanquished one of antiquity's most iconic emperors, Tomyris herself never ruled an imperium. She did not erect stone metropolises or engrave decrees on golden tablets. Her populace, the Massartai, were itinerants, their lives governed not by defensive ramparts but by the cadences of the land, the firmament, and the steed. This signified that Tomyris's legacy was never formalized. There were no marble effigies or royal coinage bearing her likeness, no archives to preserve her edicts. Instead, her narrative was disseminated, as narratives are on the steppe, through firelight, melody, and the hushed veneration of warriors. The Massartai were one among numerous formidable tribes inhabiting the Central Asian plains. Their kin included the Scythians, the Sokha, and the Dahai, all consummate horse archers who roamed the territories between the Caspian Sea and the frontiers of ancient Cathay. These tribes instilled dread in empires due to their mobility, unpredictability, and ferocity in combat. Tomaris, as a female chieftain among them, was atypical but not entirely unprecedented. Steppe culture, unlike many settled civilizations, accorded women significantly greater liberties. Women rode, hunted, engaged in combat, and even governed. Among the Scythians, archaeologists have unearthed sepulchres of female warriors interred with weaponry, armor, and equestrian gear, confirming that narratives of fierce steppe queens were more than mere fables. Tomaris stood at the apex of this tradition. Her authority emanated not from heritage or religious decree, but from esteem, fortitude, and sheer competence. She was a unifying force among scattered clans, serving as both a political leader and a military commander in a terrain where survival hinged on riding swifter, shooting more precisely, and fearing nothing. However, because the Masatai left no enduring edifices, Tomaris became a kind of ethereal queen, her appellation reverberating solely in the writings of outsiders and the oral traditions of the steppe. To the Persian scribes, she was a caution, to the Hellenes, a marvel, and to her own people, most likely a remembrance carried in their lineage and martial chants, a spectral presence riding with them across the expanses. Empires may ascend and decline in stone, but the narratives of the steppe persist in the wind, and Tomaris, fierce, grief-stricken, and unbowed, became its voice. Centuries elapsed, and the empires that once encircled the Masatai emerged and then fragmented. Cyrus's successors constructed Persepolis, contended with Alexander the Great, and ultimately faded into the forgotten annals of time. Yet, Tomaris's legend endured, not within the palatial residences of kings, but in the hearts of those who refused to acquiesce. Across Central Asia, she evolved beyond a queen. She became an emblem of feminine fortitude, of defiance, and of the untamed essence of the steppe. In many respects, Tomaris embodied a form of defiance that transcended geographical confines. She was not Roman, not Greek, not Persian, and thus her narrative belonged to no singular imperium. This rendered her both perilous and inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, chroniclers occasionally referenced her, her name reinterpreted by language but never truly forgotten. In some renditions, she was extolled for her justice and vengeance. In others, she was viewed as a brutal queen, a reminder that power wielded by a woman could be both magnificent and terrifying. By the time the Renaissance arrived, European artisans rediscovered her chronicle through Herodotus's writings. Painters depicted her in elaborate armor, poised victoriously over Cyrus's lifeless remains. In one dramatic portrayal, she brandishes his severed head aloft like a trophy, blood-soaked and triumphant. It was dramatic, assuredly, but also politically charged. These artists were captivated by the notion of a woman who not only survived in a patriarchal milieu but emerged victorious. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Tomaris became a nationalist icon in territories such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and educators reclaimed her as a historical heroine, substantiation that the foundations of Central Asian identity were fierce, proud, and profoundly feminine. Her name surfaced in textbooks, statuary, and even military ceremonies. A woman who once commanded on horseback with a bow in hand was now traversing once more through memory and myth, through insurgency and pride. In a world still grappling with the concept of potent women, Tomyris remains a formidable figure. She was not without flaw, saintly, or meek. She was resolute, brutal when exigency demanded, and compassionate only to those who warranted it. She personified resistance, and the imperial blood on her hands was a diadem she wore without apology. History often favors the architects of monuments, the drafters of statutes, the monarchs who etched their appellations into stone. Tomyris accomplished none of these. She left no empire behind, no palatial site to unearth, no royal seal to decipher. And yet, her name persists, not because she governed perpetually, but because she refused to be annihilated. She stands as a refutation of how history often recalls women, not as helpmates or mere footnotes, but as forces of destiny. Tomyris did not entreat for recognition. She seized it with sanguine conflict and fire. She did not ride behind a king. She rode against one and prevailed. Her story is recounted in scholastic settings from Central Asia to Europa, not merely because she slew Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She was not safeguarding an empire. She was safeguarding liberty. A liberty that rode on horseback, hunted with falcons, and slumbered beneath the constellations. A liberty that could not be neatly circumscribed by a chart. Today, her effigies grace the capital cities of Kazakhstan, and her image adorns currency and educational texts. For contemporary Central Asians, she is a matriarch of nations, a link to a pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic past, a reminder that their identity was forged not in capitulation, but in the clamor of battle and the thundering gallop of steeds. In a world still fragmented by power, gender, and remembrance, Tomyris serves as a luminary, not merely because she vanquished a great king, but because she imparted an even profounder lesson: that dignity is not conferred, it is seized; that sometimes leadership manifests as a mother grieving her offspring and refusing to permit his killer to elude consequence. We often ponder why certain names persist while others dissipate. Tomyris survived because she was unforgettable. Because in an epoch when women were expected to recede into the shadows of men, she arose, blade in hand, fury in heart, and inscribed her narrative into the very texture of history. Empires fall, statues crumble, but legends ride. And somewhere in the murmuring zephyrs of the steppe, a queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable. In ancient Kemet, apiary practices were not a mere avocation. They constituted a state-sanctioned discipline with celestial sanction. Long before contemporary apiaries, Egyptians had already devised an organized, mobile framework for managing mellifluous insects and extracting their saccharine yield. By 2400 BCE, elaborate depictions of apiary activities embellished the sepulchral walls in the sun-drenched necropolises of Saqqara. It was not solely about harvesting the sweet secretion. It was a hallowed practice interwoven with agronomy, therapeutics, theology, and even the posthumous existence. The Egyptians employed recumbent clay tubular hives, typically arranged in superimposed strata and positioned on their flanks. These bore no similitude to modern timber receptacles. They appeared more akin to terracotta conduits and were meticulously engineered for seasonal translocation. As the Nile's inundation receded and efflorescences appeared along its fluvial margins, hives were conveyed upstream and downstream the river to track the nectarian flow. This transhumance methodology was remarkably sophisticated for its epoch, akin to an archaic global positioning system for apian entities. Apiarists utilized clay or lithic pipes to insufflate fumigation into the hives, mollifying the insects prior to honey extraction. Lacking protective vestments, these custodians relied on precise chronometry, extensive proficiency, and considerable valor. Honeycombs were delicately extricated, and the honey collected not only for sustenance but also for therapeutic applications, embalming procedures, and sacred ceremonies. Honey was regarded as a divine benefaction, a hallowed substance intrinsically linked to Ra, the solar deity. According to Egyptian cosmogony, apian entities originated from Ra's lacrimal secretions as they descended upon Tellus. This was not merely florid language, it molded how Egyptians perceived bees, as intermediaries between the mortal and divine realms. Honey found application in votive oblations, funereal rites, and even as a medium of exchange in commercial transactions. It also occupied a prominent position in medicine. Ancient papyri enumerate honey as a principal constituent in over 500 therapeutic formulations, commingled with botanicals, fermented grape juice, or lacteal fluid to address wounds, contaminations, and gastrointestinal afflictions. Its antibacterial properties were acknowledged, even if the underlying scientific principles remained unapprehended. Beeswax, too, was harvested and employed in cosmetic preparations, embalming, and even writing substrata. Its worth extended beyond the apiary, becoming an integral part of the daily routines of scribes, sacerdotal figures, and healers alike. In Egypt, the hive was not merely a fount of sweetness. It was an emblem of equilibrium, convalescence, and cosmic order, assiduously nurtured under the vigilant gazes of both humankind and divine entities. While Egypt bestowed structure and sanctity upon apiary practices, ancient Mesopotamia contributed something equally indispensable: statutes. The cradle of civilization not only mastered hydromelioration, script, and urban development. They also apprehended the value of honey and the criticality of safeguarding its production. Although Mesopotamian apiary practices were not as visually commemorated as in Egyptian sepulchres, their vestiges are discernible in cuneiform tablets and legislative codes, indicating a subtly sophisticated methodology. References to bees and honey emerge as early as the Sumerian period. Akkadian and Babylonian codices mention Ninhursag, translated as bee gardens or apiaries. These locales were frequently associated with temple grounds or regal estates, implying that honey production was a resource controlled by the elite. Honey and beeswax were utilized in devotional offerings, therapeutics, victuals, and commerce, and the forfeiture of a hive could precipitate significant fiscal repercussions. The most compelling substantiation originates from the Code of Hammurabi, dating to approximately 1754 BCE. While much of the code famously addresses matters such as larceny, corporeal harm, and agriculture, a few passages directly pertain to beer-related contentions. If an individual permitted their apian colony to egress into another's cultivated land and inflict damage, they were held accountable. If honey was purloined, restitution was mandated, sometimes in the form of argentine or substitute receptacles. In a world where virtually everything was quantified in cereal grains, the fact that honey warranted its own legal safeguards speaks volumes. Mesopotamians also perceived bees as more than mere insects. Some texts characterized them as celestial emissaries, even associating them with Ninurta, the deity of agriculture and warfare. Beeswax, in particular, was prized for sealing documents and crafting ceremonial effigies. It possessed both utilitarian and arcane significance, integral to both administrative processes and sorcery. Although the precise configuration of Mesopotamian hives is not fully preserved, scholars surmise they may have utilized adobe or woven basket hives, analogous to early Levantine paradigms. These would likely have been maintained in shaded gardens or on elevated structures, shielded from the intense summer order. Mesopotamian apiary practices were less about veneration and more about systematization, regulating resources, ensuring equity, and upholding the economic equilibrium of a society where even a bee's sting could instigate litigation. Here, the hive was not merely a biological marvel. It was a micro-universe of order, jurisprudence, and the civilizing impetus itself. References to bees and honey emerge as early as the Sumerian period. Akkadian and Babylonian codices mention Ninhursag, translated as bee gardens or apiaries. These locales were frequently associated with temple grounds or regal estates, implying that honey production was a resource controlled by the elite. Honey and beeswax were utilized in devotional offerings, therapeutics, victuals, and commerce, and the forfeiture of a hive could precipitate significant fiscal repercussions. The most compelling substantiation originates from the Code of Hammurabi, dating to approximately 1754 BCE. While much of the code famously addresses matters such as larceny, corporeal harm, and agriculture, a few passages directly pertain to bee-related contentions. If an individual permitted their apian colony to egress into another's cultivated land and inflict damage, they were held accountable. If honey was purloined, restitution was mandated, sometimes in the form of argentine or substitute receptacles. In a world where virtually everything was quantified in cereal grains, the fact that honey warranted its own legal safeguards speaks volumes. Mesopotamians also perceived bees as more than mere insects. Some texts characterized them as celestial emissaries, even associating them with Ninurta, the deity of agriculture and warfare. Beeswax, in particular, was prized for sealing documents and crafting ceremonial effigies. It possessed both utilitarian and arcane significance, integral to both administrative processes and sorcery. Although the precise configuration of Mesopotamian hives is not fully preserved, scholars surmise they may have utilized adobe or woven basket hives, analogous to early Levantine paradigms. These would likely have been maintained in shaded gardens or on elevated structures, shielded from the intense summer order. Mesopotamian apiary practices were less about veneration and more about systematization, regulating resources, ensuring equity, and upholding the economic equilibrium of a society where even a bee's sting could instigate litigation. Here, the hive was not merely a biological marvel. It was a micro-universe of order, jurisprudence, and the civilizing impetus itself. The ancient Hellenes did not simply investigate apian entities. They held them in veneration, regarded them with trepidation, and structured their polis based on their enigmatic organization. For the Hellenes, the hive was more than a fount of sweetness. It was a living trope, a schematic for the quintessential city-state, an emblem of divine concord, and a fount of ceaseless scientific inquiry. Hellenic apiarists advanced the science of apiculture with a fusion of practical acumen and philosophical grace. Unlike antecedent civilizations that employed stationary clay hives, the Hellenes developed mobile terracotta hives with detachable opercula and segments. These facilitated readier ingress to the honeycomb without obliterating the colony, an early stride towards sustainable harvesting. They also perfected the technique of smoke management. Utilizing ceramic bellows and clay smokers, they would direct fumigation into the hive's orifice, sedating the apian entities prior to honey extraction. This innovation not only mitigated stings but also preserved the hive's structural integrity, enabling multiple harvests per season. One of the most influential intellects in Hellenic history, Aristotle, assiduously scrutinized bees. In his Historia Animalium, he delineated hive comportment, observing that bees appeared to possess distinct functions. Some gathered nectar, others defended the apiary, and one he designated the king bee seemed to lead. Although he erred concerning the gender, Aristotle's observations laid the groundwork for centuries of apian investigation. Honey occupied a revered status in Hellenic culture. It sweetened fermented grape juice, preserved pomaceous fruits, and flavored baked confections. It was also employed as a base for medicinal unguents, particularly in dermatological applications for wounds, and was deemed a divine benefaction. The Hellenes believed that ambrosia, the sustenance of the Olympian deities, was a commingling of honey and vinous liquor. The bee itself held mythopoeic significance. It was associated with Artemis, chthonic deity of untamed things, and Demeter, chthonic deity of the harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were even denominated Melissa, the Hellenic lexeme for bees. The concept of the bee as a hallowed feminine force carried profound symbolic potency. For the Hellenes, the hive was both a scientific marvel and a spiritual emblem, a memento that even the smallest organisms act with volition, regimen, and elegance. In studying bees, they believed they were examining the very ordinances of nature and perhaps even the divinities themselves. If the Hellenes approached bees with wonder, the Romans managed them with aspiration. Apiary practices in the Roman Imperium were not merely a small-scale industry. They were augmented to satisfy the exigencies of a civilization that spanned continents. From the vineyards of Gallia to the uplands of Hispania, Rome transmuted the unassuming hive into an empire-spanning endeavor. The Romans inherited much of their apiary erudition from the Greeks and Etruscans, but they elaborated it into a formalized agrarian discipline. Scribes such as Varro and Columella documented meticulous directives for constructing hives, harvesting honey, and relocating colonies. Their treatises describe apiary management with a striking contemporaneity, including observations on swarm dynamics, seasonal cycles, and pest regulation. Roman hives assumed multitudinous configurations: hollowed logs, cork bark receptacles, clay tubes, and even woven baskets sealed with excrement or mud. Adaptability was paramount. In frigid climes, more insulation was requisite. In torrid provinces, ventilation was indispensable. These innovations enabled Rome's apiarists to apply their craft across vastly disparate regions of the imperium. To pacify bees, Romans employed clay vessels filled with smoldering aromatic botanicals like origanum or thymus. The fumigation mollified the hive and perhaps conferred a subtle savor to the honey. Harvesting was executed with metallic instruments, and serraceous material was separated by liquefaction and filtration, subsequently utilized in illuminants, writing substrata, cosmetic preparations, and even waterproofing naval vessels. Honey was not merely victuals, it was ubiquitous. It was admixed to vinous liquor to produce mulsum, employed in baking, in sauces for flesh and piscatorial fare, and even as an incipient energetic source for athletes and legionaries. Roman physicians, adhering to Hippocratic canons, prescribed honey for laryngeal discomforts, ulcerations, febrile conditions, and digestive afflictions. Its antibacterial attributes were broadly known and utilized. But perhaps the most distinctively Roman aspect of their apiary practices was its systematization. Grand villas often maintained dedicated mellifluous establishments, managed by enslaved labor under the superintendence of estate administrators. Production was catalogued in ledgers, and surplus honey was vended in marketplaces or exported to distant provinces. Bees were regarded not merely as insects, but as productive contributors to the Roman economy. For the Romans, a well-managed hive mirrored a well-ordered household, structured, amenable, and endlessly fecund. While ancient civilizations cultivated bees for their saccharine secretions and seraceous products, many also perceived the hive as a portal to the divine. Across Kemet, Hellas, Mesopotamia, and beyond, bees were not merely insects. They were numinous entities, flitting between planes of existence, conveying messages from divine beings, and offering hallowed gifts like honey that bridged the terrestrial and supernatural realms. In Kemet, bees were directly linked to divine Genesis. As previously remarked, mythology posited that Ra, the Heliacal deity, shed lacrimal secretions that transmuted into bees upon contact with Tellus. Honey was utilized in votive oblations to propitiate deities and to accompany the deceased into the posthumous existence. The bee also became a regal emblem. Pharaohs of Lower Kemet bore the appellation He of the Sedge and the Bee, associating their authority with the cosmic harmony of the hive. In Hellas, the bee held potent feminine symbolism. The priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, chthonic deities of fertility and wilderness, were denominated Melissae or bees. These women were considered conduits between the divine and mortal realms. The Oracle of Delphi, one of the most significant sacral centers in the ancient world, was believed by some to have originally been presided over by bee priestesses. Even the renowned Pythia, the Delphic prophetess, was sometimes referred to as the Delphic bee. The hive itself was frequently viewed as a microcosm of ideal order, disciplined, altruistic, and productive. Philosophers and mystics likened bee society to an ideal human society, cooperative, industrious, and reverent. The Stoics admired bees for their intrinsic sense of obligation. Early Christians would subsequently embrace the bee as a symbol of purity and resurrection, noting how bees create but do not succumb to carnal desire. In the arcane traditions of Mesopotamia, bees were invoked in ritualistic purification. In some Hittite ceremonies, a living bee was emancipated after absorbing the community's impurities, literally transporting transgression away on its minuscule ailey. Honey and seraceous material were combusted in hallowed fires, employed in crafting protective talismans, and incorporated into magical texts for benedictions and healing. The bee was more than a metaphor. It was a nexus, a creature that inhabited nature's veiled spaces, produced auric sustenance without inflicting harm, and stung only in self-defense. For ancient peoples, bees were not merely prodigious, they were mystical. For the ancient world, honey was not merely palatable, it was celestial medicine. Long before the discernment of microorganisms, individuals instinctively apprehended that honey could sanitize lesions, alleviate tussive symptoms, and preserve corporeal remains. It was not sorcery, though it often felt thus. It was chemistry centuries preceding its formal explication. In Kemet, honey was a bedrock of ancient therapeutics. Medical papyri like the Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, enumerate honey in over 500 prescriptions. It was commingled with lacteal fluid, fecus, allium, and botanicals to address everything from ocular infections to gastrointestinal afflictions. When combined with adipose tissue or resinous exudate, it was applied as an unguent to combustions and excisions. Physicians knew that lesions treated with honey healed more rapidly and resisted contamination, likely due to honey's inherent acidity and dihydrogen peroxide content. The Hellenes followed suit. Hippocrates, the progenitor of modern medicine, prescribed honey for respiratory ailments, ulcerations, and lassitude. He utilized honey commingled with acetum to create oxymol, a tonic employed to clear phlegm and reduce febrile states. Hellenic athletes consumed saccharine water to enhance endurance during Olympic training, believing it restored vigor more expeditiously than vinous liquor or aqueous fluid alone. In Bharat, the Ayurvedic system held honey, madhu, in high esteem. It was categorized by sapidity, provenance, and therapeutic potency. Ayurvedic texts cautioned against superheating honey but endorsed it as a treatment for indigestion, catarrhal afflictions, lesions, and even toxicosis. It was also employed in sacred rituals, offered to divinities and consumed during hallowed abstinences for both spiritual and corporeal purgation. The Romans too believed in the medicinal efficacy of honey. Pliny the Elder documented dozens of therapeutic formulations involving honey in his natural history. It served as a base for unguents, gargles, and purgatives, and was even employed to treat the wounded after combat. Honey commingled with opiate juice was administered as a soporific. Roman surgeons maintained it at hand to dress lesions and mitigate inflammation. Beeswax also held its place in therapeutics, as a base for emplasters, balms, and even dental obturations. Its malleability and resistance to putrefaction rendered it ideal for sealing and preserving. In essence, honey in the ancient world was not merely dulcet, it was vital. It healed the infirm, preserved the deceased, and symbolized purity. It was the pharmacopoeia of the divinities, delivered by the Aili of Apian entities. Ancient apiarists were more than mere agriculturists. They were innovators, mechanical engineers, and astute observers of nature. Across civilizations, they developed specialized implements and methodologies that enabled them to effectively manage apian colonies, sustainably harvest mellifluous secretions, and even safeguard themselves from the bees' defensive stings. One of the most critical innovations was the configuration of the hive itself. The Egyptians popularized the utilization of horizontal, cylindrical clay hives, essentially large terracotta conduits stacked in rows. These hives were durable, portable, and emulated the natural cavitations where bees thrived. Similarly, the Hellenes and Romans employed terracotta and woven basket hives, some with detachable opercula to permit ingress to honeycombs without obliterating the colony. The capacity to inspect and harvest without harming the bees was revolutionary, paving the way for contemporary sustainable apiculture. To safely extract honey, ancient apiarists employed fumigation to mollify the bees. The Hellenes invented clay smokers and bellows engineered to direct smoke into the hive's orifice. The fumigation obscured alarm pheromones released by sentinel bees, mitigating their aggression. Romans refined this by combusting fragrant botanicals such as origanum or thymus, which soothed the bees and potentially conferred subtle savors to the honey. Harvesting implements varied. Lignous or cupric knives were utilized to meticulously excise combs. Sometimes honeycombs were pressed to extract liquid honey, and serraceous material was liquefied and filtered for subsequent utilization. Apiarists frequently wore minimal protection, relying on proficiency and meticulous technique to avert stings. Protective suits and gloves were still millennia distant. Ancient texts reveal that apiarists also meticulously observed apian comportment. They comprehended swarm cycles, seasonal patterns, and the criticality of relocating hives to optimize nectar collection. Some cultures practiced transhumance, conveying hives to track the efflorescence of flowering botanicals, analogous to modern migratory apiculture. Additionally, honey storage was a pivotal aspect of ancient apiary management. Egyptians utilized sealed ceramic receptacles to store honey, safeguarding it from humidity and putrefaction. Honey's remarkable shelf life was well known, sometimes enduring for centuries when sealed within sepulchres. Even the nexus between humankind and apian entities was meticulously managed. Rituals were performed to propitiate bee spirits or divinities, ensuring cooperation and averting misfortune. This spiritual solicitude was as vital as the physical implements in maintaining a productive hive. In summation, ancient apiary management was a fusion of artisanship, natural philosophy, and reverence. The implements and methodologies they developed established foundations that continue to influence contemporary apiculture. The ancient practice of apiary management laid the bedrock for a relationship between humankind and mellifluous insects that persists to this day. Far from being a mere agrarian activity, early apiary management was an art and science that influenced therapeutics, theology, economy, and ecology across civilizations, shaping our comprehension of nature and perpetuability. From the Nilotic Valley to the uplands of Anatolia, from the temples of Hellas to the agrarian estates of Rome, ancient apiarists honed methodologies to safeguard and sustain their colonies. Their innovations in hive configuration, smoke utilization, and seasonal management facilitated sustainable honey harvests, a practice crucial for both survival and commerce. The esteem they demonstrated for the bees' life cycles helped foster a model of concord between humankind and nature. Their comprehension of honey as a therapeutic agent informed the nascent pharmacopoeias of Kemet, Barat, and Rome, influencing healing practices that persist in traditional therapeutics worldwide. Honey's antibacterial and preservative properties became the fons et origo for wound care and remedies, while beeswax shaped incipient technologies in cosmetic preparations, artistry, and construction. The symbolic and spiritual significances ascribed to bees and honey in ancient cultures also endure. Sacred rituals honoring bees and honey continue in various traditions, reflecting humanity's ongoing fascination with the hive as a metaphor for order, cooperation, and divine benediction. The notion of bees as emissaries between worlds or symbols of resurrection permeates artistic expressions, literary works, and folklore across centuries. Moreover, the ancient practice of migratory apiary management, conveying hives to track floral efflorescences, is echoed in modern commercial agriculture, indispensable for crop pollination and global food provisioning. The innovations of ancient apiarists helped set the stage for today's cognizance of bees as vital pollinators and the environmental exigencies they confront. Despite technological advancements, the core relationship remains unaltered. Humankind relies on bees for sustenance, therapeutics, and ecosystemic well-being, and bees in turn have molded human culture, economy, and spirituality since the dawn of civilization. The legacy of ancient apiary management is a testament to human ingenuity, reverence for nature, and the enduring potency of collaboration, both within the hive and between species. It reminds us that even the smallest organisms can inspire scientific inquiry, faith, and survival.